I think we can clearly now establish that that incident at Terry's Tacos was just cover. It was a story they had to cook up to create the belief that Lieutenant Jim Dangle was no longer with us, when we know now that he changed his identity and went by Luke Alexander Denman and prepared to serve his country to overthrow the evil, terrible, horrible socialists in Venezuela. I knew I had seen this guy somewhere before. I just couldn't place it. But he's speaking, by the way, and I think a lot of my military friends are going to be very interested to hear what Jim, or Luke, whatever he's going by today, has to say about his involvement in this whole thing. Now, a couple details that I had forgotten to cover here. Apparently, the last time we looked at this, we didn't see the whole picture. Apparently, this is the other American over here, and he almost kind of appears like he might have stood close to a weight set, or perhaps he had walked back and forth to the PX, because he almost looks like he's done something approximating PT, unlike the Pillsbury Doughboy and Lieutenant Jim here. These guys aren't special forces. They say they're special forces, but they're not special forces. They're not even former special forces. Not even close. And when you listen to Lieutenant Jim here talk about his time in the military, I think especially a lot of my Army guys are going to listen to this and probably fall out of their chairs. So without any further delay, the guy who is doing the interviewing speaks some broken English, so there's going to be some parts where I translate the question. Usually the answer will give away what the question is, but wait until you hear his answers. Forget the fact that he's got this giant mop on his head and he went into operations with a goatee. Check this out.
What's your name?
Luke Alexander Denman.
What is your age?
34.
Where do you live?
In Austin, Texas.
When did you enter the army?
In 2006.
Okay, real quick. Name, rank, serial number. Everything else is fuck you or silence. And that's the case with Special Forces. And this guy is just Mr. Cooperative right off the bat. So he's 34, real quick. Says he went into the Army in 2006. So that would have made him 20 years old, 14 years ago. And apparently did 5 years. They're going to reveal that. But check out what he says he did.
What does your tactical training?
I was in the Army for 5 years. I did infantry and AIT training. And I also did deep water dive training and aviation training for fixed-wing aircraft.
I was in the Army for 5 years. I did infantry and AIT, deep water dive training, and fixed-wing aircraft maintenance. Now, I tried to look up that MOS, and I think it's 15 November. But that doesn't involve any deep water dive training. And if you were in the Army for 5 years, you didn't get 2 MOSs. 2 jobs. So, those of you saying that, well, he's telling a false story to throw him off, you don't do that. Not unless you've been trained to. And in this particular case, he's not been. And once again, this is just a total shit show. Very, very doubtful this guy was in for that long. I could see him getting signed up as the fixed-winged aircraft tech. That I could see. But the rest, total bullshit. But it gets worse.
Where and when did you meet Jordan Goudreau?
In Germany in 2009 or 2010.
Okay, he was in Germany in 2009 or 2010. So apparently made it through basic, made it through AIT, and then he went to Germany, and that's where he encountered Mr. Jordan Goudreau. Now, given Mr. Goudreau's background, that's a little suspect, but we'll let him keep talking.
What was the job proposal for Jordan?
To meet Venezuelans in Colombia, train them, and come with them to Venezuela to secure Caracas and secure an airport here for follow-on.
When did Jordan contact you for the job?
Jordan contacted me for the job in early December, but he didn't give me a lot of details about exactly what it was.
When did you fly from US to Colombia?
In January on the 16th.
Who accompanied you?
Jordan, Alex, and Aaron.
How did you move to Rioja?
We took a car that Alex drove with myself and Aaron.
Who accompanied you?
It was just Alex, myself, and Aaron in the car to Rioja.
Who resided you in Rioja?
Chacon.
How much would Jordan pay for the job?
I expected anywhere from 50 to 100,000.
50 to 100,000 what? Bolivars? US dollars? This guy's alleging that he met Jordan Goudreau in 2010, 9 or 10, in Germany. And this fixed-wheeled mechanic, fixed aircraft wing mechanic, whatever the hell he is, 15 November, somehow had such a good relationship with this alleged Special Forces guy that they stayed in contact for 10 years. For 10 years. And based on that relationship, he was then contacted out of the blue for some mission into Venezuela, where he's going to be paid something between 50 and 10,000 something or others. Here. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It's painful to listen to. What the interrogator here is trying to get to, and you would see it later on, is he asked him twice, who accompanied him in the car driving from Colombia. There's a female involved in this, and there's a very high-ranking Colombian involved in this that remains unnamed. Well, the female's named. Her name is Chacon, and she's the driver, and that's what he's trying to get him to establish here. The wealthy Colombian male, elderly, in a wheelchair, they don't name in this, but there's only a few people that describes. And this would take, if it's who I think it is, I'm not going to say anything, this would take this operation and connect it directly to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the President of Colombia. So they would have known as well. There were meetings down there multiple times between Pompeo and the President of Colombia. And there is one member of their inner circle that is in a wheelchair down there. So this would, I tell you what, given that Goudreau is clearly established, connected to random guy named Juan, and we've seen random guy named Juan get invited to the White House and honored, and we've also seen him in private meetings with Mr. Trump, and I showed those images in the last video. The idea that this was just a bunch of random mercenaries or former special forces or whatever is just ridiculous. This was all coordinated by the U.S. government. I guarantee it. And now they're going to try to hang Goudreau and try to wash their hands of this. I mean, they could be half right. They could have decided to pull back on this, the U.S. government, but Goudreau wanted to not have the egg on his face, and he wanted to go forward. That's hard for me to believe that he would do that, given that if this was all something where he was going to be paid and he was going to be remunerated by the government, by our government for this, if it went well, and they said, nope, sorry, we're out, we're going to disavow you because this has gone wrong or that has gone wrong or we believe you're compromised, it's very difficult for me to believe that he would have gone forward. And so I think the Venezuelans have nailed this. And there's an article out here, and this is the Greensburg Daily News. And there's a blurb in this. And I wanted to share it with you that is very important. Give me 1 second to find it here. Okay, Goudreau apparently can't get anybody to return his phone calls, given that he's under investigation for international crimes, Florida state crimes, and crimes against federal government, allegedly. I can see that that's not really anything too hard to believe. But Goudreau said by telephone earlier Monday that 52 other fighters had infiltrated Venezuelan territory and were in the first stage of a mission to recruit members of the security force to join their cause. Maduro and his General Saab said that they've arrested 114 people suspected in this attempted attack, and they are in the hunt for 92 others. So apparently, this was not some little deal with just a half a dozen guys. Apparently, this was much larger. And they'd had a greater group involved. But one other thing. I have mentioned before that these people were our ally. They were our friends. I want some of my guys to look closely at the weapons being used by the third guy from the left and the fifth guy from the left. That's right. Those are old school. I think they're A1s, M16 A1s, maybe A2s. It's hard to tell. Can't really determine that from this distance. But the guy, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the right. That's definitely not an M16. It's definitely a different kind of weapon. Looks like some kind of a FN. But once again, not Russian weapons, not Chinese weapons, American made. And these guys, don't look like they're all mismatched uniforms. They don't look like they're starving and hungry and disorganized. They got the job done here. They stopped this cold, didn't even get close. This whole thing completely fell apart. Apparently what it looks like is that they had no operational security and they had no good intelligence. I'll bet you anything these guys, even if they'd have made it into Caracas, would have probably had to ask directions to Miraflores Palace. And there would have been no way, even if they got there. What was their plan to deal with the bike patrols? Miraflores is heavily guarded. There's no way they would have gotten to Maduro. There's no way they would have gotten anywhere near Maduro. And, you can see this. The vast majority of the weapons were seized by the Colombian police. And these guys were outed by guys in a fishing boat. What do they think is going to happen You see, there's a huge problem that virtually every leader of our military forces has brought to our government's attention, this particular government's attention. There is no way to affect good operational security for any kind of event in Venezuela. There's no way to do it without them knowing we're coming. Some type of an extraction like this is impossible. Impossible. Could we go in and straight up throw 1st, 2nd Marines, the 82nd, the 101st, and the 7th, and maybe the 10th down there, and just burn it down and overwhelm them? Sure. You'll never get Maduro. He'll be gone, and in the process, you'll get thousands and thousands and thousands of our warfighters killed. And yeah, we could seize Miraflores. They would have to leave, and you'd never hold the country, though. And in the process, you would put us at war with all of Latin America. Remember something with Vietnam. We didn't have 20 million Vietnamese living inside our borders when we invaded Vietnam. Right now, we have 20 million plus Latinos living within our border. And this is another thing that DC doesn't get about the culture. This is why they fail. The first most important thing to Latinos is God. They are virtually all Christians. Now, you can make whatever, determination you want about, Protestant, Roman Catholic, but whatever. They're Christians first. That's number one in their life. Number two thing in their life is family. One of the reasons they have not been able to defeat the FARC or the ELN is because those networks, those information networks, are run by families that are loyal to each other. That's the number two most important thing in the life of a Latin person. Number three is they are Latinos. They are Christians first, members of their family second, and Latinos third. There's never going to be any North American that's ever going to turn one Latino against another one. There's no gringo going to get that job done. Regardless of how bad Maduro is or is alleged to be, there will never be any white person go down there and get Latinos to turn on other Latinos and fight amongst themselves. Never gonna happen. Never gonna happen. They've been dealing with this game for 60 years. And even if they were special forces guys, our special forces guys are great guys. They're hard workers. They're talented. They're well-trained. I very much doubt these two guys that went down there were. I'm talking about our actual special forces guys now. There's a difference between that and growing up generationally learning how to be a guerrilla warfighter. There are people down there right now that have learned how to fight guerrilla warfare style from their grandparents who learned it from their parents. They've been fighting down there since 1960. That's 60 years. In their homes, from their homes, in their own backyards. Teaching it to their children. Those children taught it to children. And now those children are teaching it to children. They have 4 generations of warfighters down there. And they don't have 1,000 of them. They don't have 10,000 of them. They have millions of them that operate in those jungles every day. They have kids, 12 years old, that can rip apart an M16 and put it back together again. And they don't discriminate men, women, children, old, young. It will be a meat grinder. Believe me, if it was as easy as DC and Pompeo and Abrams and all these guys would make it seem, don't you think the Brazilians would have done it by now? Or the Colombians? The Brazilians are no joke, guys. They are a big military. They are a powerful military. They're second only to us in this hemisphere. The Colombians have the best jungle special forces in the whole world, including ours. And they won't try it. If the Colombians won't try it and the Brazilians won't try it, what chance do you think we have? And we shouldn't really even be considering it simply based on a political difference. If you want to yell about corruption, the Maduro government is drug dealing. And really? Ever been to Peru? Ever been to Colombia? Ever been to Brazil? You don't think there's drugs and corruption in those governments? Are we threatening to invade? Before Syria, the largest group of internally displaced refugees in the world was in Colombia. Starving, suffering, homeless refugees. The largest group before what happened in Syria was in Colombia, not Venezuela. Why didn't we invade Colombia? To save the starving children, quote unquote. Nobody can answer these questions. Nobody even bothers to ask our government these questions about what really started all this down there and what this is all really about. So, anyway, looks like Lieutenant Jim is going to have to go back to police work, or maybe he'll be a security guard somewhere. Like, share, subscribe.